Hey, Guoba here, back for another video on the Dragon Summoner. You guys have asked away, and so this is one of a few videos I'll be making on her to go further in depth on what she's all about. Today's topic is about her supports. I'll be reviewing them, talking about what makes them so good or not so good, and also their synergies with other units as well as how to build them for Castorice. To avoid information bloat, I won't be going into sustains this video, and have saved that for another one that is coming very soon and before she even releases, so you'll be good to go. Stay tuned for more by subscribing, like and share to help out, and let's begin. I'll start this video with the important thumbnail topic: does she need Tribbie? In my main guide, I valued Tribbie quite highly, and I still do, but a lot of her value comes with her easy usability, permanent uptime, pure fiction prowess, and the team ceiling. If you don't care for that ceiling or pure fiction, then Tribbie isn't as necessary. As content gets harder, she will become more and more desirable for your Castorice, but Castorice's floor is so strong, along with the shilling, that it makes it just fine in 3.2. Tribbie and Castorice are not like Ruan Mei and Firefly back in the day. Back then, we had no replacements or even similar characters to Ruan Mei. Even right now, she remains the sole E0 weakness break efficiency buffer. But with Tribbie, we do have a similar character. Tribbie offers 24% res pen and 30% vulnerability. Ruan Mei offers 10% speed, 25% res pen, 50% weakness break efficiency, and 68% damage. The break efficiency is not always useful, it's sometimes even annoying, but more on that later. And her res pen is not always up as it lasts 2 turns, and her ultimate rotation is 3 turns. However, playing around her ult uptime and ensuring you're always spamming dragons during it means it's not that big of a problem. In pure damage amp, the vulnerability is going to be more powerful than the damage percent because Castorice saturates on it a ton already. But when applying that 68% damage permanently to my Castorice simulation, I get a 26% damage increase, which is only 4% off of the power of Tribbie's 30% vulnerability. Of course, if using E2 Castorice, Sunday, Quantum Damage Orb, it will get weaker. But it's close, and it makes sense. It's still 68% damage, and to put things into perspective, even if you have 200 damage percent on your character already, going to 268% is still a 1.23 times damage increase. Not to mention that the high damage percent dilution happens on the later breath attacks, and so the earlier ones get a noticeable buff. If you include E1 Ruan Mei, well then Ruan Mei's damage amp is superior, but you can do the same with Tribbie E1, which is unrivaled. Despite the similar damage amp, Tribbie also brings her personal damage, high frequency attacks, and the ability to use dance like crazy. And that is where the gap between the two is created. Not in damage amp necessarily, but in overall team damage and action and attack count. More turns and more attacks with Castorice's best sustains means more dragons. Now, the attack frequency is only relevant right now, with Lwatch and Gallagher being her premier sustains and having on-attack healing. If a future sustain outperforms them and doesn't have this on-attack feature, or you just don't use these two healers, well, Tribbie remains powerful for Castorice, but her priority drops due to dropping a synergistic trait. So in Memory of Chaos, her personal damage, buff uptime, attack frequency, and dance, or even her signature for more damage, elevates the team's floor and ceiling above Ruan Mei's. For an example, Tribbie's ceiling with Remembrance MC versus Flame Reaver is a 0 cycle. It requires a ton of optimization not meant for 99% of players though. Her standard clear, however, is a 1 cycle with a fast Remembrance MC and Gallagher. As for Ruan Mei, at E0 she may have a ceiling of 1 cycle, but I could not get that high. Though with an E1 Ruan Mei, I did get a 1 cycle, but it was a slow Vonwhack setup with a super fast Remembrance MC and Gallagher. No Eagle or Dance though. But that means the standard clear for Ruan Mei is going to be a 2 cycle. So you have a 1 cycle difference in ceiling, but also in standard clear time. Now that could translate into a 2 cycle difference when content no longer helps Castorice as much, but right now, if you're worried about Castorice's standard performance without Tribbie and MOC, I don't think you should be. They also introduced an insanely shield boss for her that she can nearly 0 cycle on autoplay. But the gap between these two units is most noticeable in Pure Fiction, because Pure Fiction is kind of just a cheat mode for Tribbie, and it's less of a Castorice thing. It's always AoE, which elevates her damage to its peak, as well as battering her like crazy for eventual dance spamming. But Tribbie making Castorice perform so excellently in Pure Fiction is one of the main reasons why I talk so highly about their synergy. She is Castorice's best support right now, but a lot of it is because she allows her to excel everywhere with ease. If you don't care for pure fiction, perhaps you have two brilliant teams already or one side can carry, then you're chilling more than most people. But finally, in Apocalyptic Shadow, the mode is mostly about break thresholds, and the boss is very tanky until that point. This is where Ruan Mei shines, and at E1 for me, in standard play, became better than Tribbie in the crate experience AS rotation on either side. Now, if breaking the weakness no longer heals, then Tribbie gains priority due to her better battering. But if we get a best in slot non-attacking based healer, then I can see Ruan Mei outperforming in Apocalyptic Shadow again anyway, outside of hit count based bosses like the banana one. Because Tribbie's superior damage amp, uptime, and damage contribution is less relevant when you need to focus on breaking first as well as the single target boss focus, the gap between the two becomes much narrower. And then you consider the 1.5 times break efficiency, and suddenly the general priority swaps between the two. If you don't know, Castorice's dragon does a whole ton of toughness reduction with an AoE value of 10 per breath, as well as each of the 6 bounces on its detonation doing 5 toughness reduction each. Again, the ceiling of Tribbie with dance spam and eagle set combined with crazy heal threshold optimizations could go even higher. But when testing Ruan Mei E1 versus Tribbie E0 with some standard setups, Ruan Mei came out ahead in both the bug and Hule. And this was all still with optimizing Remembrance MC to act a ton, and with Gallagher on a high speed, high sustain build. I did not change them when swapping Tribbie out. Ruan Mei ran normal speed but Von Whack to get ahead of the first dragon post technique. 160 break effect, memories of the past. There was no eagle or dance or whatever. Tribbie ran slow with a high crit build and S5 dance. Ruan Mei's build is usually going to be this standard setup like back on release, but there are other options. You can go slower with the 120 speed Von Whack Ruan Mei in MOC to specifically get her ult up before the second Netherwing turn after Castorice's technique, and then you can keep her ult up as long as possible. With a very fast RMC and Gallagher battering Castorice, you ideally zero cycle the first wave without Ruan Mei taking another turn. And if you are banking on her not taking turns and not needing to replenish that ult, you can go for damage boosting oriented cones like her Sig or Poised to Bloom with RMC even, though her barely taking turns does put a bigger strain on your other two units battering as much as possible. If you can't use Ruan Mei, well, the only other supports I'd say are possible in this slot in 3.2 are Jiaoshu and Pella. But just like Tribbie can drop in power without Luocha Gallagher type healers, so can they. Jiaoshu E0S1 has comparable amp to Ruan Mei with no problems on uptime. He also attacks more than Ruan Mei does, but he is a limited unit and you would need the S1 for the amp as Castorice does 0 ultimate damage. Build him fast. Even Eagle can technically work if you use that on him with Acheron, and make sure his debuffs hit. Pella's amp when considering resolution and level 12 ultimate and S1 on your Castorice is equal to E0S1 Jiaoshu's amp, but it won't always be up like his will. You'll have to make sure it is when Netherwing pops off if you want a similar performance. She can attack a bit more though with a fast Eagle ult spam playstyle, but the difference is not that substantial, and I still prefer Ruan Mei over the two of these anyway. These two units, just like Ruan Mei, will not compare to Tribbie in pure fiction, but will be decent in MOC. And for Apocalyptic Shadow specifically, they will fall off versus either Tribbie or Ruan Mei. And you'd think Jiaoshu would be better in MOC because he can attack multiple besotted targets, but to be honest, Ruan Mei felt much better to use because of her 10% speed buff, which allows allies to act way more often with easier gear requirements. Yes, her break efficiency is annoying, and even the delay as you want to take damage from enemies, but the team taking more actions made it worth it in the later cycles. With insane support gear that doesn't need the speed, then you can consider replacing her. In fact, when I said the big three for Castorice in my guide were Sunday, RMC, and Tribbie, I feel like you could include Ruan Mei as a fourth top pick because of her power in AS, decent power in MOC, and that ability to somewhat replace Tribbie. She's also technically free as of 3.2. So if you have Ruan Mei E0, ideally E1, only Pure Fiction would really want Tribbie, MOC would kinda want Tribbie, and Apocalyptic Shadow does not need her at all. Now for the other support slot. Generally when team building I like to have one of Sunday or RMC or a sub DPS, and then one perma AoE damage amper, which are basically aura or debuff based damage ampers like Tribbie, Ruan Mei, Jiaoshu, etc. This is because of a few reasons. First, having two perma damage ampers like Ruan Mei and Tribbie together leads to fewer actions on Castorice, and more reliance on the team battering her ult. Castorice taking an extra turn can lead to so much more Nubud, and is especially powerful when you detonate, Castorice acts, gets advanced, and acts again. Not to mention that hyper buffing power is important. AoE aura buffers and debuffers are generally made weaker than single target buffers, as their quality instead is benefiting multiple possible DPS characters. Then, secondly, you have the reverse. Having 2 advanced buffers with Sunday and RMC creates a different problem. Now she is taking too many turns and can lose buff uptime from either of these 2 units. She would also now consume way too much HP, and sustaining it would be a very hard task when the healing shelling disappears from the endgame. Yes, you could basic on her, but then those extra turns aren't benefiting your charge generation anymore. And yes, you can time your dragons during Mem support and Sunday's buffs, but it's a way more annoying task than just having a permanent damage amper, and you won't always have Mem support anymore. And finally, if we want a sub DPS like Mydei or Blade, then you'd ideally want an AoE buffer to benefit them. If we bring a Sunday or RMC in that team, most or all of their value will be given to Castorice and lead to a much weaker sub DPS performance. In Blade's case, it could be fine, as his base kit is pretty weak and maybe he can take on a battery role, but Mydei dishes out so much damage that you want to make good use out of it. So who can go in the slot? First, let's look at Sunday. Sunday's problems are not his own, it's more that Castorice's kit is devilishly designed to fit poorly with him. You can still use him with other units just fine, he's still insane, but Castorice would rather use Remembrance MC most of the time. Despite that, people still want to use him, and some have E1 S1 Sunday, which provides some crazy amp. Castorice's damage profile is about 85% Memo Sprite damage, and so 40% Def Ignore is a bit crazy, especially if you have her S1. So if you have him E1 S1, then you can use him perfectly fine in the place of Remembrance MC in AS and MOC. My preferred way of running him is a -1 setup, considering the 40% speed buff Castorice gains. Now, I know it is risky with the speed possibly fluctuating, but with a strong enough sustain like Lord Gallagher and ideally a Tribbie, then you're chilling most of the time. Remember also Castorice heals a ton on the Dragon detonation. So you can run a Sunday at -1 speed to however much speed Castorice has post 40% speed buff. It will be around 125 to 133. With Dance 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 on Tribbie, or when using Ruan Mei's 10% speed buff, you can go past the 134 breakpoint on both Castorice and Sunday. Now, if you're not using Dance on Tribbie, then you can instead do something a little sussy, but something that works completely fine. Castorice's crit rate is very easy to build with her traces, poet set, and supports giving crit rate. In fact, I've seen many Castorice builds overcap on crit rate, even with RMC rather than Sunday. So now, if you want to hit that 134 breakpoint without Dance Tribbie, you need at least 96 speed pre-combat on Castorice, but Poet Set's limits are 95 speed for the maximum crit rate. Well, considering her easy building requirements, you can just drop that extra 12% crit rate, which probably overcapped anyway if using Sunday, and with Sunday's 20% crit rate buff, you'll be chilling. The other option is to go high speed on Sunday at 160 speed. I actually don't like it that much right now, but with an even stronger sustain it might be fine. The reason I don't like it is because it makes her healing thresholds even stricter, as you want to ult before Sunday acts, but now he's even faster, and Castorice no longer gains an extra turn before he does to help charge Newbud. If you cannot heal fast enough, you'll summon the dragon after Sunday's turn, and have to wait all the way till Sunday's next turn to buff it, which is wasting 2 dragon turns worth of buff potential. There's also a 166 speed variation you can do that makes you act ahead of the dragon, and here you instead ult after Sunday's turn and bank on his second turn buffing the dragon. So you pull up Castorice, she acts and summons Netherwing, then you do a bunch of damage, keep it alive, and Sunday will act before Netherwing's next action. Then you can bring up Castorice, she can enhance skill, and Netherwing has all buffs up ready to pop off. The problem here is the team will act in between these 2 Sunday turns and may overheal and waste potential Newbud charge whilst you're waiting to apply Sunday's buffs. So I think in general, her best setup with Sunday is a -1 speed setup. As for RMC, they will want to run super fast, and this is very easy with the abundance of speed buffs we have in gear now. 2p speed with 2p speed, energy planar, and the Herta Shop Remembrance Lycone. Ideally, you're hitting above 165 speed, and 168 speed is a Dance 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 0 cycle breakpoint with 2 S5 dance procs. The reason for at least 165 speed is because I like skilling and using Mem support on Castorice on the first wave before Netherwing acts again, and the dragon has 165 speed. This is a very cool rotation that I use all the time and I feel should be her standard play with Remembrance MC. Castorice uses her technique, dragon acts, no kill dragon. Remembrance MC skills, Gallagher's skills and ults and basics, Mem Axe, Castorice Axe, basics, and now Dragon Axe with true damage for free. You can optimize this further with stuff like the 3-star Shadowburn light cone on Remembrance MC to let Gallagher not even need to use his ultimate. Or if you have a Vonoax support, they can act and give energy for Mem. This would then let you save Gallagher's ultimate into basic combo for just after the dragon detonation, which then supercharges the next one. Some people have also asked about healing body on RMC because they heal Mem on skill. First off, they do not always want to skill because having Mem act at bad timings is detrimental to tuning. On top of that, your sustain using as much SP as possible is usually preferred and will contribute to more new bud gain. Doing a simple calculation shows that a heal chest can gain around 2.8% new bud charge over a crit damage chest per Remembrance MC skill. The likelihood of that actually bringing a whole extra dragon over a crit chest is very low, but perhaps some hardcore min-maxers can plan around it. Dropping a crit damage chest though will drop team-wide crit damage by nearly 9%. Whether you use RMC or Sunday is up to you, with RMC generally being better and easier to use as well as having a higher ceiling. Now, you can also use Mydei in this slot. Instead of giving turns to Castorice to charge Netherwing and her ult, he instead uses his own HP consumption and healing to achieve a very similar effect. He doesn't give her any buffing though unfortunately, but his raw power is insane, and he has decent self buffs just like Castorice. Paired with Tribbie, and you're looking at a very powerful dual or more like multi-DPS composition. Though because the buffs are shilling Castorice a lot, they're also shilling him, and so their combined performance will drop eventually. Mydei would run a 134 speed setup with standard stat goals and his favorite set because he still wants to do damage. But him taking turns frequently with that 134 speed is nice to battery Castorice as much as possible without hurting his power. Now, the only other real character that can go in this slot outside of Remembrance MC, Sunday, and Mydei is Blade. He is a much weaker Mydei and doesn't synergize as well with Castorice's large HP consumption, but he's still a frequent attacker that can heal and lose HP and thus help out Castorice while bringing a bit of damage. I tried many builds, including a cooked hyperspeed one, but I'd say just run your regular 134 damage build and hope that his buffs make him a bit more relevant. Now, people want to know about Sparkle or Bronya here. Right off the bat, if I had to choose one of them, I'd choose Bronya. Now, 85% of Castorice's damage is in her Memo Sprite, and so Bronya and Sparkle can only buff Netherwing if they want Castorice to do high damage. But at that point, you're using a weaker Sunday, and at that point, you're also just using an even weaker RMC. If they want to push Castorice forward, they can't push Netherwing alongside her, and they can't buff both at the same time with their single target abilities. Their damage amp is also weaker than Sunday, and on top of that, both provide some attack percent in their kit, which is irrelevant here. But the way you'd use them is similar to Sunday. Castorice acts before them, she needs to be able to ult, summon Netherwing, and then Netherwing acts. Sparkle or Bronya pushes Netherwing forward with all their buffs instead of Castorice. It is kinda nice with RMC as you wouldn't lose Mem support uptime, but the combo is not fantastic, and if using Tribbie instead, it's irrelevant. And with Sunday, you'd have Castorice act before Netherwing's second turn, which allows you to use more breaths on the first turn and then heal up Netherwing for the second. This is not the case with Bronya or Sparkle, as Castorice isn't pushed up. This means on top of the other flaws, you are again getting less damage. Just use Remembrance MC if you can, or pray a similar unit is released soon. The other Harmony units left are ones that are usually too weak, like the 4 stars, and or heavily attack focused, like Robin, and thus they all lose out on a lot of their potential with Castorice. For debuffers, it's only really Silverwolf left, but she's too single target focused for me. Maybe with buffs in 3.4? Since Castorice's AoE is so potent, maybe she could be nice to help nuke bosses, but you'd have to make sure the AoE mobs die, with one less damage amper helping out. Anyways, I hope this in-depth look into supports and how good they are and how to build them helped you guys out in any way. Stay tuned for the sustain one, where I'll be showing off why Gallagher and Lawashi are so potent, as well as my tips on building Castorice's sustains. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and thanks for watching. Thanks to my amazing YouTube members, and have a Guoba day.